Judge Brett Kavanaugh is defending himself against charges of sexual misconduct. He says he just wants a fair process as the White House digs in its heels over his nomination. Fox News correspondent Doug Luzader reports from Washington this morning. Democrats are not letting up.
Well, Judge Brett Kavanaugh is defending himself against charges of sexual misconduct.
He says he just wants a fair process as the White House digs in its heels over his nomination.
He went to national TV last night with one of our colleagues, Martha McCallum. There's Doug Luzader. Hi, Doug.
Good morning, Ed. We're kind of seeing a strategy shift as far as the White House is concerned on this. We've seen Brett Kavanaugh issue statements of denial in the past, written statements about these allegations. Last night, though, he took things a step further.
We believe Debbie Ramirez. We believe Dr. Ford.
The campaign to derail the Brett Kavanaugh nomination is, if anything, amplified. Protesters taking over Capitol Hill offices as Kavanaugh has his say.
I've never sexually assaulted anyone, not in high school, not ever.
Kavanaugh and his wife Ashley sat down for a Fox News interview, tackling sexual misconduct allegations head on. And coming from Christine Blasey Ford and now Deborah Ramirez, reported in The New Yorker.
I know I'm telling the truth. I know my lifelong record. And I'm not going to let false accusations drive me out of this process.
Brett Kavanaugh is an absolute outstanding person. Hopefully, he will be confirmed quickly.
And President Trump shows no signs of backing down, and neither does an uncharacteristically angry Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell.
This shameful smear campaign has hit a new low.
The Senate is edging closer to a Thursday hearing for Christine Blasey Ford, but will we hear from others? And controversial attorney Michael Avenatti says he knows of another accuser. But what the allegations lack so far is corroboration. And while Republicans question the timing, Democrats want the process delayed.
If you really believed these allegations are part of a despicable smear job, Leader McConnell, why don't you call for an FBI investigation?
Well, what Mitch McConnell is calling for is a full Senate vote on the Kavanaugh nomination, although, Mike and Alex, it's not clear when that would take place. In the meantime, we're waiting for this big Thursday hearing.
Big Thursday in D.C., Doug. We'll see you tomorrow. That's because Thursday.
Thanks.
This is going to happen.
Philadelphia comedian Bill Cosby is in a Montgomery County court this morning where a judge will finally decide how to punish the 81-year-old comedian after he was convicted in April of drugging and sexually assaulting former Temple University employee Andrea Constand in 2004.
Will Bill Cosby, a man we know very well in the city of Philadelphia, be in prison tonight? A psychologist is set to testify this morning. The only witness, apparently, for the defense. Cosby was found guilty of sexual assault and faces a sentence of probation and up to 10 years in prison. Attorney Shaka Johnson and Fox legal analyst Ken Rothweiler here. Now, I almost said 30 years because that's what we were talking about yesterday. Ken, it's now down to 10 years. Explain the ruling of the judge.
Yeah, that's what we talked about yesterday, Mike. The decision was whether he would rule that the sentences would be consecutive, which would be 30 years, because they'd be stacked, against each other. So it would go 10 years, 10 years, 10 years, or whether they'd be concurrent. He decided that they would be concurrent, which means that the ruling is that the most Bill Cosby could serve is 10 years.
So that's what we'll hear today, Shaka. The maximum would be 10 years in prison.
Certainly, well, we'll hear this morning, well, not this morning, sometime today, prayerfully, what his sentence will be. And now we know there's at least a cap or a bookend on what the sentence will possibly be. You know,
Ken, yesterday we talked about this sexually violent predator. And I heard the prosecution yesterday say, you know, if you let him have house arrest, he has a proclivity for doing this again. He might attack someone again. Was that their thinking and theory?
It was. This is a huge ruling today. It's a psychologist from the Pennsylvania Sexual Offenders Assessment Board, and that person took a look at Bill Cosby and made an assessment as to whether she would recommend that he's a sexually violent predator, and she does in fact make that recommendation. And that's a huge ruling for the judge, because the judge will take that into account when assessing the sentence.
It's important to remember, though, that Mr. Cosby did not participate, which defendants are allowed to withdraw their participation from the SOAB finding. So that determination was made without having a one-on-one sit-down interview by the government psychologist.
What's an SOAB?
The Sexual Offender Assessment Board.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So, Shaka, will Bill Cosby make a statement today?
No. He's maintained his silence, with the exception of the one outburst that he had after the finding of guilt. I don't think he'll make any statement. He has been stoic throughout the entire trial. I think that persists through the sentencing hearing.
Ken, whatever happened to throw yourself on the mercy of the court?
Yeah, I think that's a mistake. As I said yesterday, I think he should throw himself on the mercy of the courts. I think he should express remorse. And I think if he did actually express remorse, that would affect Judge O'Neill and it would affect the sentence.
Hey, does he get bail, Chaka?
No, quite frankly. I mean, he could ask for bail pending appeal. He could ask for that. But I don't think it's likely that he would receive that. And to add one thing to what you said a moment ago with respect to his silence, I think all of this is keeping in line with the pending appeal that's going to come. You don't want to throw yourself on the mercy of the court and say you did this and you want to atone and you want forgiveness, and then later on say, but I didn't do it.
So no matter what he gets, he's going to, unless it's house arrest, he will appeal, right? And does that mean he goes to prison while the appeal, or can he go home?
Well, that'll be decided by the judge today. That's also a huge ruling. The judge will decide whether he gets bail pending appeal and whether he can do that outside the jail cell or inside the jail cell.
Okay, it's time for both of your predictions. Shaka, let's start with you. What does the judge say today?
I think the statutory guidelines are 22 months to 36 months plus or minus. I think that Mr. Cosby receives a state sentence, which is I'm saying somewhere around 1.5 to 3 years in prison. In prison. Ken?
Yes. Yeah, I think it's going to be a little bit more than that. Yesterday I said 8 years, and what I wasn't taking into account was the guidelines. The guidelines are basically from 10 months to 4 years. So if he gets the most with regard to the guidelines, he could get 4 years. But he doesn't have to look at the guidelines. He can do more than that. And I think in this case, because there were 5 people that came in, there were a total of 60 accusers, that judge actually only let 5 in. I think he can disregard the guidelines and give more. So I'm going to say between 4 and 8 years.
4 and 8. Yeah. All right. When do you think it'll happen, Shaka?
I think this evening.
You think it'll be this evening, not this morning?
I think this evening. And I wouldn't be surprised if Judge O'Neill put this under advisement. And
what does that mean?
Basically held it under advisement, took it to chambers. Everybody, let's come back. Let me process all that I've received in the way of victim impact statements, in the way of letters. Let me process it all and come back on a Friday, strategically on a Friday, and render his verdict. I wouldn't be surprised about that.
What do you think of that, Ken? Friday?
Well, I don't like to disagree with Shaka. That could be the case. Although I think it's going to happen a little bit quicker, Mike, because there's only one witness today. It's the defense expert witness to combat the prosecution witness with regard to the sexually violent predator. So I think it'll be early this afternoon, actually.
Okay, this afternoon. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good.
Okay, coming up, President Trump will be addressing the United Nations General Assembly. Part of Trump's speech will be promoting his warmer ties with North Korea as a foreign policy success, while also calling on nations to keep up pressure on Pyongyang through sanctions. The president is also expected to call on all countries to join the U.S. in its efforts to isolate Iran. That'll be coming up in a few short minutes as he makes his way to the podium.
anymore.
Lost him.
Who find themselves in situations that we want to examine, deal with, and resolve. Another perhaps is, perhaps when I was young, I looked at my situation and compared it with those of some of my friends who had excellent ideas, but they didn't have neither the knowledge nor the ability to carry through on their endeavors. And so we experienced the anguish of not having startup capital for our businesses, and we spent long nights before paying monthly bills, trying to invent where to get the money to meet our obligations to our employees. We learned from personal experience not to allow others to underestimate us for being young people. We learned the decisive role of private initiative. We understood that entrepreneurship is a value that generates wealth, jobs, well-being, self-esteem, and freedom. Today, the private sector on the global scale is more aware of its role. That role goes far beyond simply profits, production, and jobs. Today, large, medium, and small businesses are interconnected in thousands of ways, and as they understand their role in providing well-being in their daily actions, they can be essential actors for global efforts to promote peace and prosperity. En ese sentido, debemos cumplir juntos los compromisos asumidos live up together to commitments that we have undertaken as part of the agenda for sustainable development. And the notion of partnership is an essential part of that agenda. Perhaps, another perhaps. Because 20 years ago I was assaulted and I lost the movement of my legs. As you can see, I get around in a wheelchair. Is this bad? I don't know. A Chinese saying says that everything is neither that bad nor that good. It's bad because when I came home after the hospital, this was very hard. There were no IV drips or painkillers, only a constant pain. And I remembered Francis of Assisi, who spoke of pain, my brother, because I experienced this kind of pain and even stronger pain. And now, perhaps because I see from this wheelchair, I see through the eyes of the heart. When you have legs, you look ahead of you and above you. However, when you're seated in a wheelchair, you see horizontally and you see below you. And you discover other realities, other worlds. You see those who only encounter barriers to move forward, to continue, including even to be able to live. Barrier treatment, xenophobia, racism, injustice, machismo, inequality. In other words, to sum it up, exclusion. This story is not only my story, it's the story of billions of people around the world. Madam President of the General Assembly, this is one of the most important topics that will be examined, is precisely the implementation of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. The implementation of these rights of the convention and its optional protocol is precisely what will help us ensure that together we will live up to a commitment that remains pending. And bearing this in mind, it is a great honor for Ecuador to exercise in the next 2 years the presidency of the Conference of States Parties of the Convention. Now, from this forum, we will ensure that promotion and protection of individuals with disability, that we step up our efforts to do that, to make sure that we increase accessibility, so that we become a truly inclusive United Nations. And we're not talking about only physical accessibility, but also so that individuals with disability and their rights are taken into account in all discussions, resolutions, and initiatives of the United Nations. And perhaps as well, because now, just as in the past when I travel in my country and around the world, I see exclusion and injustice. We exclude those who are different, who are poor, who are older, who are young. We mistreat women, girls, indigenous women. There are so many brothers and sisters who are abandoned and forgotten. And there are so many people who walk right by without even noticing them. As member states of the United Nations, we cannot allow that because of laziness or inertia, because of that misery and injustice, remain a part of our everyday landscape. That is precisely what Sustainable Development Goals are aimed at. These goals are an essential part of our program of government. The program that I just want to repeat is called A Whole Life. Perhaps also because it's clear for me that during our whole life we must be happy, and it's precisely for that goal that we govern. We are in a great country here. Its Declaration of Independence of the United States. Its famous second line, written by the great Thomas Jefferson, with contributions by Adams and Benjamin Franklin, and I quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." End of quote. The pursuit of happiness. This declaration inspired, amongst others, the Constitution of this great country, which is a global reference in scientific research and development. For this, and perhaps because we always very attentively follow events around the world, we don't understand how a country such as this can blockade an almost defenseless nation such as Cuba. It is almost impossible for us to understand that you prevent others from having the right to their rights, to life, to freedom, and to the pursuit of happiness, that you prevent them. And also, perhaps because we were idealistic young people, because we continue to be rebellious, we don't understand how major powers spend on weapons instead of investing in the development of nations. We also don't understand how these countries that have achieved such a level of development and superiority in weapons prefer to see their sons fight in wars, intervene in foreign conflicts, instead of resolving them. They aggravate them and perpetuate them. Perhaps also because when bankers and those who were unscrupulous robbed the pockets of the people of Ecuador, when they made entire families poor, when governments instead of caring for the poor and the needy, they do everything that's quite the opposite. In Ecuador, we are receiving daily at least 6,000 of our brethren from Venezuela. Children come with diphtheria, with polio. Women who are pregnant have never had any kind of medical control. We have provided 15,000 vaccines for these children, and we have provided medical care for some 1 million people who've left their homes to find a better future. This is the largest diaspora in the history of our continent. We have urged the government and the people of Venezuela to resolve their crisis the way it should be, on the basis of a national dialogue that is frank and inclusive. We also encouraged just recently the neighboring countries of the region to take on practically and in a comprehensive, holistic way to express support for migrants and displaced people and refugees from Venezuela. We cannot allow, we cannot simply make diplomatic statements. We want continent-wide efforts to find a solution, including a structural solution to the problems of the brethren people of Venezuela. I want to underscore that no one emigrates because they want to. They are forced to do it because they are uprooted, and because often it leads to dismembering of the family, which is very harsh and painful. Jose Marti, the Cuban poet, said, Jose Marti said, when a people emigrates, there are too many. Those who govern them are useless. So we express solidarity for those who come to us, and we invite all those who are migrants who left our country to come back to their homes, to reincorporate to our in our family, national family. In July, we approved the Global Pact of Migration that will be adopted in December in Morocco. We cannot allow this pact to remain a dead letter. We have to become aware that inclusion has no borders, that the right of every individual to life and happiness does not end where mine begins. Both rights are fundamental rights of the human being. They're interdependent, and they enrich each other in their interconnectedness. Now, regarding the crisis in Venezuela or the crisis of Nicaragua, our Latin America has a huge challenge of consolidating democracy, given that various countries have authoritarian, corrupt, and populist governments. The history of the United Nations is the history of a common pact to preserve the human rights of the citizens of the whole world. Rights can only be guaranteed in the framework of solid institutions with broad freedom of expression, with a transition of power. These are fundamental elements of strong democracies, and our nation should be committed to building these democracies, to caring for them, and my government has maintained its democratic commitment in each one of its actions and decisions. It has maintained its commitment with the original ideals of our United Nations. Kofi Annan, this great man who left us so many lessons, such important lessons, said, in the face of the growing cynicism about democracy, we cannot give up. Rather, we need to defend and advocate for the values and virtues of democracy. End of quote. Madam President, dear friend, Maria Fernandez Espinosa, you are the first Latin American woman to preside this assembly. Ecuador would like to thank for this the support of brethren nations for your election. We are aware of the immense responsibility that you have at the head of this global forum. We all are in favor of seeing the UN be relevant for our nations. We are the organization that brings together our nations in their concerns and in their aspirations. We see the international effort that the UN is making to care for our children, for our neighbors, for ourselves. For this, we support its disarmament plan. We support the Global Migration Pact. We're promoting the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And in addition to an innumerable list of actions, commitments, and decisions, the United Nations is our organization. If there are flaws in it, we should correct them. Let's not try to take it apart and dismember it. Let's not take away funding from it, because we need to strengthen it for the future. So we want to leave a strong UN for our futures. If we're going to create additional complementary organizations, that we can do to for example, support trading systems or specific projects, regional projects in the area of culture, education, or sports. All these are welcome, but the ultimate goal should be to strengthen the global union, to implement the Sustainable Development Goals, and all the historic commitments that we have undersigned. However, we don't believe, nor should we use regional organizations to defend outdated, perverse, and dictatorial systems, as we've seen born and unfortunately die in the last few decades. Colleagues and brothers and sisters from around the world, this institution is the most important living symbol of the global commitment to peace. For years, we've spoken a lot about peace. We've spoken at length about peace, but no one has been able to do better than the definition of Gandhi regarding its condition as the sole path for humankind. Peace is our greatest right. It's a sine qua non condition for life and happiness. Ecuador has serious problems on our northern border, in particular with international crime and drug trafficking, and we are dealing with this with the president of Colombia. We have committed ourselves to putting an end to this, and as each cause will have its effect, and each effect will continue transforming itself in another cause, we know that world peace is a duty that remains pending because it hasn't yet taken full root in the heart of every human being. As a father and a grandfather, I know that there won't be any peace unless we inculcate values throughout life. We know that, for example, civility is not simply an issue of public interest or honesty or transparency. It's not a topic taught in schools, but in particular it has to be inculcated in the heart. And unless we do that, we will never create the groundwork for peaceful coexistence. As someone who comes from the Amazon region, I know that there won't be any peace unless we preserve our planet. We must make the Amazon not only the lungs but the heart of our planet. As an individual with disabilities, if there won't be peace, there won't be peace unless we have inclusion and we celebrate diversity. As a president, I know that peace is ultimately the option of preferring the poor, working for those who need it most, making sure that everyone without exception are free to realize their dreams every day, every single day throughout their whole lives. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Ecuador for the statement he has just made. May I request representatives to remain seated while we greet the head of state and the rostrum is prepared for the next speaker.
Check. Check.
the Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Donald Trump, President of the United States of America. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Donald Trump, President of the United States of America, and to invite him to address the Assembly. You have the floor, sir.
Madam President, Mr. Secretary General, world leaders, ambassadors, and distinguished delegates. 1 year ago, I stood before you for the first time in this grand hall. I addressed the threats facing our world, and I presented a vision to achieve a brighter future for all of humanity. Today, I stand before the United Nations General Assembly to share the extraordinary progress we've made. In less than 2 years, my administration has accomplished more than almost any administration in the history of our country. America's so true. Didn't expect that reaction, but that's okay. America's economy is booming like never before. Since my election, we've added $10 trillion in wealth. The stock market is at an all-time high in history, and jobless claims are at a 50-year low. African American, Hispanic American, and Asian American unemployment have all achieved their lowest levels ever recorded. We've added more than 4 million new jobs, including 500,000 manufacturing jobs. We have passed the biggest tax cuts and reforms in American history. We've started the construction of a major border wall, and we have greatly strengthened border security. We have secured record funding for our military, $700 billion this year, and $716 billion next year. Our military will soon be more powerful than it has ever been before. In other words, the United States is stronger, safer, and a richer country than it was when I assumed office less than 2 years ago. We are standing up for America and for the American people, and we are also standing up for the world. This is great news for our citizens and for peace-loving people everywhere. We believe that when nations respect the rights of their neighbors and defend the interests of their people, they can better work together to secure the blessings of safety, prosperity, and peace. Each of us here today is the emissary of a distinct culture, a rich history, and a people bound together by ties of memory, tradition, and the values that make our homelands like nowhere else on earth. That is why America will always choose independence and cooperation over global governance, control, and domination. I honor the right of every nation in this room to pursue its own customs, beliefs, and traditions. The United States will not tell you how to live or work or worship. We only ask that you honor our sovereignty in return. From Warsaw to Brussels to Tokyo to Singapore, it has been my highest honor to represent the United States abroad. I have forged close relationships and friendships and strong partnerships with the leaders of many nations in this room, and our approach has always yielded incredible change. With support from many countries here today, we have engaged with North Korea to replace the specter of conflict with a bold and new push for peace. In June, I traveled to Singapore to meet face-to-face with North Korea's leader, Chairman Kim Jong-un. We had highly productive conversations and meetings, and we agreed that it was in both countries' interest to pursue the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Since that meeting, we have already seen a number of encouraging measures that few could have imagined only a short time ago. The missiles and rockets are no longer flying in every direction. Nuclear testing has stopped. Some military facilities are already being dismantled. Our hostages have been released, and as promised, the remains of our fallen heroes are being returned home to lay at rest in American soil. I would like to thank Chairman Kim for his courage and for the steps he has taken, though much work remains to be done. The sanctions will stay in place until denuclearization occurs. I also want to thank the many member states who helped us reach this moment, a moment that is actually far greater than people would understand, far greater. But for also their support and the critical support that we will all need going forward. Special thanks to President Moon of South Korea, Prime Minister Abe of Japan, and President Xi of China. In the Middle East, our new approach is also yielding great strides and very historic change. Following my trip to Saudi Arabia last year, the Gulf countries opened a new center to target terrorist financing. They are enforcing new sanctions, working with us to identify and track terrorist networks, and taking more responsibility for fighting terrorism and extremism in their own region. The UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar have pledged billions of dollars to aid the people of Syria and Yemen, and they are pursuing multiple avenues to ending Yemen's horrible, horrific civil war. Ultimately, it is up to the nations of the region to decide what kind of future they want for themselves and their children. For that reason, the United States is working with the Gulf Cooperation Council, Jordan, and Egypt to establish a regional strategic alliance so that Middle Eastern nations can advance prosperity, stability, and security across their home region. Thanks to the United States military and our partnership with many of your nations, I am pleased to report that the bloodthirsty killers known as ISIS have been driven out from the territory they once held in Iraq and Syria. We will continue to work with friends and allies to deny radical Islamic terrorists any funding, territory, or support, or any means of infiltrating our borders. The ongoing tragedy in Syria is heartbreaking. Our shared goals must be the de-escalation of military conflict, along with a political solution that honors the will of the Syrian people. In this vein, we urge the United Nations-led peace process be reinvigorated. But rest assured, the United States will respond if chemical weapons are deployed by the Assad regime. I commend the people of Jordan and other neighboring countries for hosting refugees from this very brutal civil war. As we see in Jordan, the most compassionate policy is to place refugees as close to their homes as possible, to ease their eventual return to be part of the rebuilding process. This approach also stretches finite resources to help far more people, increasing the impact of every dollar spent. Every solution to the humanitarian crisis in Syria must also include a strategy to address the brutal regime that has fueled and financed it, the corrupt dictatorship in Iran. Iran's leaders sow chaos, death, and destruction. They do not respect their neighbors or borders or the sovereign rights of nations. Instead, Iran's leaders plunder the nation's resources to enrich themselves and to spread mayhem across the Middle East and far beyond. The Iranian people are rightly outraged that their leaders have embezzled billions of dollars from Iran's treasury, seized valuable portions of the economy, and looted the people's religious endowments, all to line their own pockets and send their proxies to wage war. Not good. Iran's neighbors have paid a heavy toll for the region's agenda of aggression and expansion. That is why so many countries in the Middle East strongly supported my decision to withdraw the United States from the horrible 2015 Iran nuclear deal and reimpose nuclear sanctions. The Iran deal was a windfall for Iran's leaders. In the years since the deal was reached, Iran's military budget grew nearly 40%. The dictatorship used the funds to build nuclear-capable missiles, increase internal repression, finance terrorism, and fund havoc and slaughter in Syria and Yemen. The United States has launched a campaign of economic pressure to deny the regime the funds it needs to advance its bloody agenda. Last month, we began reimposing hard-hitting nuclear sanctions that have been lifted under the Iran deal. Additional sanctions will resume November 5th, and more will follow. And we are working with countries that import Iranian crude oil to cut their purchases substantially. We cannot allow the world's leading sponsor of terrorism to possess the planet's most dangerous weapons. We cannot allow a regime that chants death to America and that threatens Israel with annihilation to possess the means to deliver a nuclear warhead to any city on earth. Just can't do it. We ask all nations to isolate Iran's regime as long as its aggression continues. And we ask all nations to support Iran's people as they struggle to reclaim their religious and righteous destiny. This year, we also took another significant step forward in the Middle East in recognition of every sovereign state to determine its own capital. I moved the U.S. Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. The United States is committed to a future of peace and stability in the region, including peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. That aim is advanced, not harmed, by acknowledging the obvious facts. America's policy of principled realism means we will not be held hostage to old dogmas, discredited ideologies, and so-called experts who have been proven wrong over the years, time and time again. This is true not only in matters of peace, but in matters of prosperity. We believe that trade must be fair and reciprocal. The United States will not be taken advantage of any longer. For decades, the United States opened its economy, the largest by far on earth, with few conditions. We allowed foreign goods from all over the world to flow freely across our borders. Yet, other countries did not grant us fair and reciprocal access to their markets in return. Even worse, some countries abused their openness to dump their products, subsidize their goods, target our industries, and manipulate their currencies to gain unfair advantage over our country. As a result, our trade deficit ballooned to nearly $800 billion a year. For this reason, we are systematically renegotiating broken and bad trade deals. Last month, we announced a groundbreaking U.S.-Mexico trade agreement. And just yesterday, I stood with President Moon to announce the successful completion of the brand new U.S.-Korea trade deal. And this is just the beginning. The system is in dire need of change. For example, countries were admitted to the World Trade Organization that violate every single principle on which the organization is based. While the United States and many other nations play by the rules, these countries use government-run industrial planning and state-owned enterprises to rig the system in their favor. They engage in relentless product dumping, forced technology transfer, and the theft of intellectual property. The United States lost over 3 million manufacturing jobs, nearly a quarter of all steel jobs, and 60,000 factories after China joined the WTO. And we have racked up $13 trillion in trade deficits over the last 2 decades. But those days are over. We will no longer tolerate such abuse. We will not allow our workers to be victimized, our companies to be cheated, and our wealth to be plundered and transferred. America will never apologize for protecting its citizens. The United States has just announced tariffs on another $200 billion in Chinese-made goods, for a total so far of $250 billion. I have great respect and affection for my friend, President Xi, but I have made clear our trade imbalance is just not acceptable. China's market distortions and the way they deal cannot be tolerated. As my administration has demonstrated, America will always act in our national interests. I spoke before this body last year and warned that the UN Human Rights Council had become a grave embarrassment to this institution, shielding egregious human rights abusers while bashing America and its many friends. Our ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, laid out a clear agenda for reform, but despite reported and repeated warnings, no action at all was taken. So the United States took the only responsible course. We withdrew from the Human Rights Council and we will not return until real reform is enacted. For similar reasons, the United States will provide no support in recognition to the International Criminal Court. As far as America is concerned, the ICC has no jurisdiction, no legitimacy, and no authority. The ICC claims near universal jurisdiction over the citizens of every country, violating all principles of justice, fairness, and due process. We will never surrender America's sovereignty to an unelected, unaccountable global bureaucracy. America is governed by Americans. We reject the ideology of globalism, and we embrace the doctrine of patriotism. Around the world, responsible nations must defend against threats to sovereignty, not just from global governments, but also from other new forms of coercion and domination. In America, we believe strongly in energy security for ourselves and for our allies. We have become the largest energy producer anywhere on the face of the earth. The United States stands ready to export our abundant, affordable supply of oil, clean coal, and natural gas. OPEC and OPEC nations are, as usual, ripping off the rest of the world. And I don't like it. Nobody should like it. We defend many of these nations for nothing, and then they take advantage of us by giving us high oil prices. Not good. We want them to stop raising prices. We want them to start lowering prices, and they must contribute substantially to military protection from now on. We are not going to put up with it, these horrible prices, much longer. Reliance on a single foreign supplier can leave a nation vulnerable to extortion and intimidation. That is why we congratulate European states such as Poland for leading the construction of a Baltic pipeline so that nations are not dependent on Russia to meet their energy needs. Germany will become totally dependent on Russian energy if it does not immediately change course. Here in the Western Hemisphere, we are committed to maintaining our independence from the encroachment of expansionist foreign powers. It has been the formal policy of our country since President Monroe that we reject the interference of foreign nations in this hemisphere and in our own affairs. The United States has recently strengthened our laws to better screen foreign investments in our country for national security threats. And we welcome cooperation with countries in this region and around the world that wish to do the same. You need to do it for your own protection. The United States is also working with partners in Latin America to confront threats to sovereignty from uncontrolled migration. Tolerance for human struggling and human smuggling and trafficking is not humane. It's a horrible thing that's going on at levels that nobody has ever seen before. It's very, very cruel. Illegal immigration funds, criminal networks, ruthless gangs, and the flow of deadly drugs. Illegal immigration exploits vulnerable populations, hurts hardworking citizens, and has produced a vicious cycle of crime, violence, and poverty. Only by upholding national borders, destroying criminal gangs, can we break this cycle and establish a real foundation for prosperity. We recognize the right of every nation in this room to set its own immigration policy in accordance with its national interests, just as we ask other countries to respect our own right to do the same, which we are doing. That is one reason the United States will not participate in the new global compact on migration. Migration should not be governed by an international body unaccountable to our own citizens. Ultimately, the only long-term solution to the migration crisis is to help people build more hopeful futures in their home countries, make their countries great again. Currently, we are witnessing a human tragedy, as an example, in Venezuela. More than 2 million people have fled the anguish inflicted by the socialist Maduro regime and its Cuban sponsors. Not long ago, Venezuela was one of the richest countries on earth. Today, socialism has bankrupted the oil-rich nation and driven its people into abject poverty. Virtually everywhere socialism or communism has been tried, it has produced suffering, corruption, and decay. Socialism's thirst for power leads to expansion, incursion, and oppression. All nations of the world should resist socialism and the misery that it brings to everyone. In that spirit, we ask the nations gathered here to join us in calling for the restoration of democracy in Venezuela. Today we are announcing additional sanctions against the repressive regime, targeting Maduro's inner circle and close advisors. We are grateful for all of the work the United Nations does around the world to help people build better lives for themselves and their families. The United States is the world's largest giver in the world by far of foreign aid, but few give anything to us. That is why we are taking a hard look at U.S. foreign assistance. That will be headed up by Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. We will examine what is working, what is not working, and whether the countries who receive our dollars and our protection also have our interests at heart. Moving forward, we are only going to give foreign aid to those who respect us and, frankly, are our friends. And we expect other countries to pay their fair share for the cost of their defense. The United States is committed to making the United Nations more effective and accountable. I have said many times that the United Nations has unlimited potential. As part of our reform effort, I have told our negotiators that the United States will not pay more than 25% of the UN peacekeeping budget. This will encourage other countries to step up, get involved, and also share in this very large burden. And we are working to shift more of our funding from assessed contributions to voluntary, so that we can target American resources to the programs with the best record of success. Only when each of us does our part and contributes our share can we realize the UN's highest aspirations. We must pursue peace without fear, hope without despair, and security without apology. Looking around this hall, where so much history has transpired, We think of the many before us who have come here to address the challenges of their nations and of their times. And our thoughts turn to the same question that ran through all their speeches and resolutions, through every word and every hope. It is the question of what kind of world will we leave for our children, and what kind of nations they will inherit. The dreams that fill this hall today are as diverse as the people who have stood at this podium, and as varied as the countries represented right here in this body are. It really is something. It really is great, great history. There is India, a free society, over 1 billion people, successfully lifting countless millions out of poverty and into the middle class. There is Saudi Arabia, where King Salman and the Crown Prince are pursuing bold new reforms. There is Israel, proudly celebrating its 70th anniversary as a thriving democracy in the Holy Land. In Poland, the great people are standing up for their independence, their security, and their sovereignty. Many countries are pursuing their own unique visions, building their own hopeful futures, and chasing their own wonderful dreams of destiny, of legacy, and of a home. The whole world is richer. Humanity is better because of this beautiful constellation of nations, each very special, each very unique, and each shining brightly in its part of the world. In each one, we see awesome promise of a people bound together by a shared past and working toward a common future. As for Americans, we know what kind of future we want for ourselves. We know what kind of a nation America must always be. In America, we believe in the majesty of freedom and the dignity of the individual. We believe in self-government and the rule of law, and we prize the culture that sustains our liberty, a culture built on strong families, deep faith, and fierce independence. We celebrate our heroes. We treasure our traditions. And above all, we love our country. Inside everyone in this great chamber today, and everyone listening all around the globe, there is the heart of a patriot that feels the same powerful love for your nation, the same intense loyalty to your homeland. The passion that burns in the hearts of patriots and the souls of nations has inspired reform and revolution, sacrifice and selflessness, scientific breakthroughs, and magnificent works of art. Our task is not to erase it, but to embrace it, to build with it, to draw on its ancient wisdom, and to find within it the will to make our nations greater, our region safer, and the world better. To unleash this incredible potential in our people, we must defend the foundations that make it all possible. Sovereign and independent nations are the only vehicle where freedom has ever survived, democracy has ever endured, or peace has ever prospered. And so we must protect our sovereignty and our cherished independence above all. When we do, we will find new avenues for cooperation unfolding before us. We will find new passion for peacemaking rising within us. we will find new purpose, new resolve, and new spirit flourishing all around us and making this a more beautiful world in which to live. So together, let us choose a future of patriotism, prosperity, and pride. Let us choose peace and freedom over domination and defeat. And let us come here to this place to stand for our people and their nations, forever strong, forever sovereign, forever just, and forever thankful for the grace and the goodness and the glory of God. Thank you, God bless you, and God bless the nations of the world. Thank you very much. Thank you.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the United States of America for the statement just made. May I request representatives to remain seated while we greet the President, after which the meeting will stand suspended for 5 minutes before resuming to hear the next speaker.